Amen. Amen. All right, kids can be dismissed for the kids at church.
If you have your Bibles, I'm going to invite you to open to Proverbs chapter 10. This is the second in kind of a sub-series of 4 messages that in some way relate to money and work and finances and kind of related things. As we continue looking at the book of Proverbs through the rest of the summer. There was an article published last May in the Wall Street Journal that reported that worker satisfaction in 2022 was the highest that it had been in more than 30 years. The journal reported that 62% of American workers were satisfied with their jobs. Now, on the one hand, you could look at that and say, oh, almost 2/3 of people are happy with what they do. But think of what that also says. It also says that almost 1 in 4 aren't particularly happy with what they do or where they do it. There was a somewhat similar survey that Gallup did last year as well, and in that survey, Gallup organization found that 50%, so 1/2 of American workers were stressed at work, probably not a surprise. 41% were worried at work, and 19%, so basically 1 in 5 American workers was just downright miserable in their job. So, it's no wonder that there are a lot of people who look at work as little more than a necessary evil, who want shorter work weeks, who can't wait for retirement, or who maybe have just left the workforce altogether. It's the nature and the importance of work that is before us this morning. Before we get to a couple verses from chapter 10, let's think for a moment about how our friends at Oxford define work. They have kind of 3 different ways that they describe it. One is the activity or job that a person does to earn money. That's the way we probably mostly think of work. I'm going to work. I'm going to my job. A second description is a task or tasks to be done. A little broader. And then third, which I think will be particularly important in some ways today, is this: an activity involving mental or physical effort done to achieve a result. So that's how the folks at Oxford describe or define work. It's pretty broad. Work is far more than just a necessary evil, something to be endured until we don't have to do it anymore. Work is designed into creation. It is built into the way the world works. So it is a good and a godly thing, even though, if we're honest, it has gotten a lot more difficult because of the fall. In fact, Genesis tells us that. So with that, let's talk about work, but let's do it based on Proverbs 10, verses 4 and 5. Solomon writes this: lazy hands make a man poor or a person poor, but diligent hands bring wealth. The one who gathers crops in summer is a wise child, but the one who sleeps through harvest is a disgraceful child. As we think about these verses, let's start with the fact that work is how God provides for us. Oxford says that it's the activity or job that we do to earn money. And why do most of us need money? To do things like what? Pay the mortgage, eat, go on vacation, hopefully, any number of things, clothe our kids. Work is how God provides for us. Now, let's go back to Genesis 1 and 2 for a few minutes. You'll recall that in those chapters, Moses describes God creating this beautiful garden. He puts Adam and Eve into the middle of this garden. And along with that, he gave them pretty much all the plants, or at least the fruit from the plants to eat. A little bit later in Genesis, he adds meat to the menu. But there's an expectation in those chapters that goes along with the permissions. And it comes in a couple of ways, a couple of places. Genesis 1:26. God says that people are to rule over all those things and over creation as a whole. And if we go a couple verses later, verse 28, we are told to fill the earth and subdue it. The expectation from the beginning, and this is before the fall, the expectation from the beginning is that we as God's representatives would care for and cultivate the earth. And it is through that care and cultivation that God provides for us. Notice I said care and cultivation, not exploit and misuse. But it is through that care and cultivation that God, from the beginning, determined that he would provide for us. Now, we sang a little bit ago about that God does miracles, and he does do miracles. He's done miracles, he continues to do miracles. But let's be honest. Most of the time, as a rule, he doesn't just drop clothes into our closets. He doesn't just miraculously make food appear on our tables or put money into our bank accounts. He expects us to work. It's part of the way he's designed things. And that's a principle that underlies Proverbs 10:4 and 5. Lazy hands make a person poor, but diligent hands bring wealth. The one who gathers crops in summer is a wise child, but he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful one. You notice the contrast. Lazy hands versus diligent hands. Gathering crops versus sleeping through harvest. This is about responsibility. It's about discipline. It's about work. And there's a sense in which Solomon is saying that if you're not going to be responsible, if you're not going to be disciplined, if you're not going to be industrious, don't expect a lot. Paul makes the same point essentially to the Thessalonians, a little different context, but he says, whoever will not work shouldn't eat. Now, not whoever can't work or can't find work, but whoever is unwilling to work shouldn't eat. Paul's point, like Solomon's, is if you're not willing to do your part to provide for yourself and to provide for others, don't expect God or anyone else to just take up the slack. Not the way it works. Now let's stick with Genesis 1 and 2 for a couple more minutes. Notice, too, that work in those chapters is what God himself does. Now, God obviously doesn't do it to earn money. He doesn't need the job, so that part of Oxford description doesn't fit, but some of the other parts do. Work as tasks or as an activity involving mental or physical effort or some kind of effort to achieve a result. What's the result that God has in mind in Genesis 1 and 2? It's to create us and to create everything else that exists in creation. And Genesis 2:2 makes it clear that that was in fact work. Moses writes this, by the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the seventh day he rested from all his work. At the risk of sounding a little bit snarky, if God works, if God in a sense has to work, who are we to think that we shouldn't? God labored for 6 days. What makes us think that we should be able to get by with working 3 or 4? Yeah, God took a break. He took a day off. But being created in the image of God, among many other things, being created in God's image means, among other things, that we are created to work because God Himself works. Again, God didn't end with that 6th day. He took a rest, He took a break. But He didn't go on permanent vacation. He didn't retire. Ephesians 1 is one of the places where it speaks of God's continuing work. It talks about the continuing work of His power. God is still at work. We sang about that a few moments ago. We should be thankful. Think about everything that God has done since creation. Think about, for instance, the fact that He rescued Israel from slavery in Egypt. Think about the fact that He got Israel through the desert wanderings. He established the kingdom. He fought wars. He raised up leaders, good leaders. He got rid of bad leaders. He taught through the prophets. He's kept working. And think about Jesus. Now, there's a hardworking man if there ever was one. And He's still at work. Scriptures tell us that He is interceding for us. He is praying for us before the Father. That's work. But what has to be the biggest job in some ways, at least at this point, is Paul tells us that it's Jesus who holds this whole creation together. Not only was He present and part of creation itself, but He keeps holding the whole thing together. Now, I don't know about you, but some days I have a hard enough time keeping my life together. I can't imagine trying to keep the whole creation together. Jesus works, and He works hard. And then think about the Holy Spirit. Spirit who was present at creation, the Spirit who spoke through the prophets, the Spirit who continues to work, to draw us to faith, to convict us of sin, to empower the church, to guide our lives. So much more beyond that. God works hard. He always has, He always will. And so again, who is any of us to think that we shouldn't have to work? Third thing, notice that work has rhythms and seasons. The one who gathers crops in summer is a wise son, but the one who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful child. This is another one of those agricultural images that we find so often in the Scriptures. Farming is more than harvesting. Farmer has to till the soil, plant the seeds, fight pests and weeds, fertilize, might have to irrigate. And only when all of those things are done in the right time, in the right way, in the right order, is there any hope of a harvest. For those who first settled North America, the westward expansion, some of those farmers had to clear their land first. They had to break the sod long before they had anything to show for it. There are rhythms and seasons to work. And not only is it true for farmers, but it's true for life generally. Think, for instance, about that third description in particular from Oxford, an activity involving mental or physical effort done to achieve a result. Bigger than just what we do to earn a paycheck. How many of us think of play as work or equate play with work? I'm not seeing a lot of hands, and I'm not surprised. Because for those of us who are adults, we probably tend to think of play in terms of recreation, things that we do apart from work. That is, unless we work for Activision or Hasbro or a tennis club or something like that. But that's not true for a 3-year-old. Play is how a very young child learns. They learn by interacting with the people around them and the things in front of them, and even doing that thing that we don't understand, putting their toes in their mouths. It's all part of exploring and learning about the world in which they find themselves. Play for a young child is their work. Now, eventually, of course, that hopefully gives way. Hopefully we get to the point where we're not putting our toes in our mouths anymore. But eventually that's replaced by other kinds of learning, especially school. School, like work, is not a necessary evil. It is not simply something, or it shouldn't be something, simply to be endured. I got thinking this last week about the fact that my dad and his brother were the first two in their generation to finish high school, to go beyond 6th grade. But that was it. They never finished college, even though both of them would have liked to. 2 of my cousins and I, so 3 of us, 3 of the 4 of us, not only finished high school, not only finished college, but 3 of the 4 of us have gone on to even get doctorates, which is something that my parents and my grandparents could have never even imagined. Now, we did it because it related to our work. It related to how we earn living. That's why we did the advanced degrees. But when I go back, even before college, when I go back to think about even elementary or junior high or high school, and I think through all the classes that I had, and I, believe it or not, I don't know if this is a good thing or a frightening thing, but I can remember most of them. And I think about the teachers that I had. When I go back and think through those, with very few exceptions, there's something that I learned in that class or learned from that teacher that in some way still shapes my life. Now, I didn't realize it at the time. I'm not always conscious of it in the moment. But as I go back and I think through all those years from kindergarten through 12th grade, never mind getting to college and beyond, as I think through almost every class and every teacher, there is something that I use or that has shaped me. Education. There is a season in which that is our primary work. But it's primary work for a purpose, a result, and that is to prepare us for life. Now, to be sure, for most of us, there is also a season after those earning years, something we call retirement. There's nothing wrong with that. That is part of the rhythm and the season for most of us. But that doesn't mean, again, that work is just about earning. In an even broader sense, it's about contributing. Last week we talked about generosity, and you may recall that I said, really more in passing than anything, that generosity is about more than just money. I would argue that so is work, even though Proverbs 10 doesn't necessarily say that. Work is part of being, work is key to being part of society. A couple of you have heard me share this. I went through a local drive-through a couple of months ago now. And as I pulled up to the window, I realized there was exactly one person working that morning. She was taking the orders. She was cooking the food. She was minding the till. She was getting the food to me or to others who came through. One person. To be honest, as I was driving away, I'm surprised she hasn't quit. What we've seen in so many ways over the last couple of years, a shortage of workers just about everywhere. No one reason for that, but one of the reasons is that there are some folks who have just simply chosen to drop out of the workforce. Think about that one lone worker in that restaurant, which shall go nameless, trying to do everything by herself. When we work, we contribute. Not only to our own welfare, but to the welfare of others. Paul takes a somewhat similar approach or view in 1 Corinthians 12. You remember that's part of his discussion about spiritual gifts. And he makes the point that in the church, everyone has a God-given role, and when one person doesn't fill that role, when one person withholds their gift or their energy, the whole body suffers. Service in the church isn't just about us. But neither is work. The principle is very similar. Think about farmers like the one in Proverbs chapter 10. What if farmers don't grow a crop or raise their livestock? Not only do they lose their income, but we lose our food supply. What if hospital workers don't show up for their shift? Not only do they forfeit their income, but they potentially harm patients and frustrate their coworkers. What if trash collectors didn't collect our trash? Just let it pile up. I think we all know what fun that would be. On it could go. Our work isn't just about us. It isn't just about us having money to spend for our mortgage or our food or whatever else it is that we need to spend on. Work is not only how God provides for us, but through us how He provides for others. And I can't help but wonder if maybe that's another reason that Solomon calls laziness disgraceful. When we don't do our work, we don't contribute, and when we don't contribute, everyone loses. But when we do work, everyone gains. Lazy hands make a person poor, but diligent hands bring wealth. The one who gathers crops in summer is a wise child, but the one who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful one. But here's the what if question for this week. What if we, as followers of Jesus Christ, who claim that this book and what it teaches is indeed the only perfect rule for faith, doctrine, and conduct, what if we, as followers of Jesus Christ, were the most consistently diligent workers that people knew? Notice I use the word diligent, which is a word that Solomon uses. Diligence is about more than showing up. It's more than putting in our time. It's more than punching the clock. It's more than getting by. It's about doing things the best that we possibly can. About being a good farmer, not just a marginal one. It's about being a good doctor or a good teacher or a good store clerk or a good custodian, a good trash hauler, a good fill in the blank. Not just an average one. In our staff meetings, we've been kind of slowly working through a book by Carl Vaders. And one of the things that he says, and he's talking particularly about ministry, but he says this: good enough isn't. Good enough isn't. And I would argue that not only is that true for how we go about ministry, but it's also true for how we go about life, including work. One translator has translated the word lazy as careless. What is carelessness? It's not giving someone the care or the attention, not giving something the care or the attention that it needs or deserves. And none of us is perfect. All of us have limits. Nothing that we do will ever be perfect, and there is only so much that we can do, but that doesn't mean that we can't give the best we've got. Whether we're students or teachers or nurses or engineers or fast food workers or fill in the blank. Again, the whole point of this series is about what people see in us as followers of Jesus. There are a lot of people, sadly, including Christians, for whom good enough tends to be the standard. Including in their work. But let's face it, those are not typically the people who are going to get noticed, at least not in a good way. What if every follower of Jesus was seen to be the best student, the best teacher, the best nurse, the best food worker, the best trash hauler, the best engineer, the best fill in the blank? What if every follower of Jesus was noticed because he or she was diligent in what they did? So the question again, what if we were the most consistently diligent workers people knew?